Please be seated. Saturday a week ago was a perfect morning. The sun was shining in North Minneapolis. The squirrels were frolicking around the yard. And I was sitting on the front lawn of the Liberty House with a new group of Circle of the Beloved young adults. Circle of the Beloved is an intentional community of 4 young adults that for a year live at the Liberty House and serve full-time at nonprofit sites in the Twin Cities. During that year, they practice the values of living intentionally, kinship across lines of difference, and reconciliation. They commit to living by a rule of life and mutually supporting one another. They commit to meeting regularly with the director and St. Mark's member, Denise Graber, and meeting regularly with the volunteer chaplain, me. At our retreat on Saturday, we dug into our hopes, concerns, needs, and boundaries to make this year a success. I shared something that I often need to hear myself. The health of a relationship is not based on the absence or presence of conflict. The health of a relationship is based on how you move through that conflict together. Those young adults are living together for a year. And this year in particular, they will be home more than normal. There will be conflict. This is a part of being an intentional community. In many ways, this new community is similar to the context of today's gospel, just read by the Reverend Rena Turnham. In the gospel itself, Jesus is traveling toward and getting near Jerusalem, where he will be crucified. The closer he gets to dying and rising again. Before he gets there, Jesus needs to teach his followers how to live without him. Matthew, like all 4 of the Gospels, was written after Jesus' death and resurrection for a particular new community of followers of the way of Jesus. Those communities that are receiving the gospel are wondering, how do we live a life as communities following in the way of Jesus? What we heard is a small part of a longer speech answering these questions. The speech is a response to one of the disciples asking, "Who is the greatest in heaven?" In that way that Jesus does, he redirects the disciples' attention to what is under the question that is asked. He begins by pulling a child to his side and saying that you must be like this child, humble, and do not put a stumbling block in this child's way. He continues by telling a story of a shepherd with 100 sheep. That shepherd has 99 sheep by their side, but there's one that's missing. And so that shepherd seeks out the missing sheep. And when the shepherd finds that sheep, the shepherd rejoices. Today's passage, beginning after the found sheep, sounds procedural and clinical without what comes before it. In talking about children and the lost sheep, Jesus is setting up the Christian community to be about compassion and vulnerability. Our translation reads, "If another member of the church sins against you." What is translated as member of the church can also be translated as brother, or expanded to mean sister or sibling. Jesus is saying that for intentional communities of his followers, those who have intimate relationships, this is how to be. Jesus' words assume mutuality of relationship. These are not instructions for anyone to put themselves in abusive one-on-one situations where the power dynamics are out of balance. Jesus also used the word sin, which for many of us has baggage. In the Book of Common Prayer, sin is defined as the seeking of our own will instead of the will of God, thus distorting our relationship with God, with all people, and with all creation. For the Book of Common Prayer and for Jesus in this passage, sin is about broken relationships, not about a cosmic list of right and wrong that we are being measured against every moment of our life. Jesus knows that when 2 or 3 are gathered in his name, there will be conflict. And he is saying, work it out. Work it out with compassion, with care for the vulnerable, and with listening. What is breath-catching about what Jesus is saying is that when relationships are broken in these communities, the community's default response is reconciliation. The community's default response is restoration of relationships. The response is not about arguing for the best punishment. Even in this passage, when the response escalates, Jesus leaves the answer particularly ambiguous. Treat that person like a tax collector or Gentile. Tax collectors and Gentiles were on the outskirts of society at the time. Yet time and time again, we see Jesus in his life inviting tax collectors and Gentiles to eat with him, to tell stories with him, and to be with him. Jesus' words are also for our communities today, our faith communities, whether they look like a traditional church or a different expression of an intentional community. Jesus' words are for us. I am wondering where you are in this sacred story. Does the idea of bringing up a conflict make you break out in sweat? Or are you worried that you're going to get a phone call and have to listen to a sin? Do you hope that you're the 2 or 3 additional witnesses, not the main character, so that you can fade into the background? Are you skipping over the passage and wanting to be in the place where God is gathered with 2 or 3 people? What has caught my attention this week is that a key part of reconciliation is listening to hear. Not listening as a sign of quietness until it's your turn to speak. There's a vulnerability in listening to that which you would rather not hear. And in a playful way, I find myself wondering how I can be more like my 4-year-old nephew, Wallace. Before activities that require listening, Wallace performs a little ritual. Wallace puts his hands up to his ears, he twists his wrists, and he says that he is putting on his listening ears. Sometimes those listening ears stay on for the whole time, and sometimes they wear off sooner than we all hope. And yet, it is a small spiritual practice that inspires me and makes me wonder, when am I needing to put on my listening ears? Also, I have been deeply wrestling with this passage, which on the surface seems too idealistic and naive in today's environment. Listening or reading headlines designed to increase our anxiety, I hear my inner cynic say, does any of what Jesus say matter? It seems too small. But looking back, I have been all of these characters in this passage at one time. Someone bringing up brokenness, hearing how I have damaged a relationship, or like my role as chaplain for Circle of the Beloved, encouraging and observing others doing this good reconciliation work. Many of these moments were uncomfortable. Some of them were the messiest in my life. Yet when compassion and restoration were the mutual goal, reconciliation did happen, and those relationships deepened afterwards. And in that moment of reconciliation, God felt so close. As Jesus concludes today, for when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. There are times when it's hard to sense if God is with us. And yet I know every moment that is a moment of reconciliation, God is there. In that closeness, I am finding hope in a world that feels beyond our control. Not the kind of hope that is thin and blows away with a little breeze. I am finding the kind of hope that is a daily spiritual practice, grounded in the idea that God is here and that there are ways to respond to God's presence. That hope looks like the community of Circle of the Beloved. That hope looks like Wallace putting on his listening ears. That hope looks like our faith community. That hope looks like you.